What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. The new season has finally been announced. I'm very excited for it. There's a lot of big changes, a lot of Pokemon that honestly I would have never expected to be good have been buffed into a place where honestly they're in the top 10 of PvPoke right now. I'll go over them in just a second here, but this is a massive update, a lot of cool metas as well for the season. It's a very exciting season, so let's get into it. All right, so starting things off strong with the attack changes here, we can see that we have a lot of moves that are going to be slightly adjusted, either their energy or damage increased or decreased here. Let's go over them. Psyshock is the first one on the list. It says the energy cost is going to be decreased. Now, Psyshock is already kind of a cheap move, right? I believe it's 45 energy currently in the game, so that likely means it's going to go down to 40 energy. It's going to be a very interesting attack, because I don't think we have any 40 energy moves that are also 70 damage, so pretty efficient attack, a very nice bait move. Not a lot of Pokemon do get Psyshock, but they are going to add it into a couple Pokemon's move pools here in the future. So it is an interesting move and an option that we're going to want to look into going ahead. Psyshock, just the first of many changes, though. We can see down here as well, Dazzling Gleam going to be a little bit reworked, actually. It's not just a straight one-for-one change. We're going to see that not only is the power going to be decreased, so it's going to do a little bit less damage, but the energy cost is also decreased. So it's going to be a little bit less damage, but also a lot cheaper, hopefully. We have no idea how much they're going to decrease the energy. I think it's like 70 energy right now, so a very expensive move, but it's going to be dropped down to hopefully a more reasonable amount, maybe to a point where it's more of a bait move. Well, probably not a bait move, but maybe like 50, 55 energy around that range, where it's going to be a lot easier to reach for a lot of the Pokemon that rely on it as a fairy type offensive charge move. So potentially a very interesting move. And I don't know if a lot of Pokemon really get this, but I think one of the main Pokemon I am interested in seeing with this attack change is going to be Togetic. If it's like 50 or 55 energy, Togetic could potentially be a very strong pick in the new meta. We also have Aqua Jet here getting a change. Aqua Jet is a move that we don't really see a lot of distribution on. I think that honestly the most meta Pokemon that gets Aqua Jet is probably Dugong, I think. But Dugong already has a very good charge move pool. It has Icy Wind and Drill Run. I don't really think you can drop either one of those right now. So I think Aqua Jet on Dugong probably not going to happen. Golisopod, I think, is another Pokemon that gets it. You might use it over Liquidation. 70 damage, if it is going to be 40 energy, just like Psyshock is potentially going to be, then another very efficient move, a nice bait move, but Golisopod as well, it probably isn't the exact buff it needs to be good, but Aqua Jet in the future could potentially get released from more Pokemon, and maybe it's going to be just a good move in the future if we can keep our eyes out on it in future moveset updates. So a very interesting attack. We'll have to see where it ends up going. It's not going to impact too much in this current meta. The next move that we're going to go over, Dynamic Punch, a Pokemon that I love very much. It has Dynamic Punch known as Medicham. Unfortunately, Medicham probably not going to be the best Pokemon in this meta, despite this actually being a very interesting update. Dynamic Punch is already a pretty efficient charge move. I think it is 50 energy and 90 damage right now. It's going to likely be down to 45 energy and 90 damage, which is insane. That's a 2.0 DPE move. You don't really see a lot of those. That's like Avalanche. That's like Mewtwo's signature move, Psystrike. This is a very efficient attack, and despite Medicham not exactly being the best Pokemon to take advantage of it, saying how many ghosts and fairies we have in the meta right now, it could be a move that down the line is going to be a very good option for other Pokemon. Or maybe, one day Medicham does get a buff, another buff, I should say, and it could be a good option. But right now, the meta is a little bit hostile to a lot of fighting type Pokemon. Not a lot of picks have Dynamic Punch that can get a lot of play out of it, but it is a very efficient attack and something to once again keep our eyes on in future updates. Next up, we have Sludge, a move that is also kind of low distribution, but it has quite a hefty buff here, going from 50 damage all the way up to 70. It right now is, I believe, only on Galarian Weezing as one of the most viable Pokemon that you can really have for it. Sludge, though, being a 40 energy move, once again, is going to be 40 energy, 70 damage. So just like the Aqua Jet that we saw earlier in Psyshock as well, 4070 seems to be the new archetype of move that they're adding into the game. It seems like a very efficient, very fast-paced move, and Galarian Weezing, despite having like 1,000 charge moves that you already want to use, Sludge might just be more efficient right now than a lot of them. Maybe you want to drop Brutal Swing, or maybe you want to pair this alongside Brutal Swing, just to have really good coverage and use that as a very good offensive poison-type attacker. You don't have a lot of those. I mean, Shadow Drapion is a poison-type Pokemon, but it doesn't have a lot of poison-type charge move pressure, so maybe Galarian Weezing could fill that role. You can also see down here, Hex is getting a bit of a buff as well. It's going from 6 damage all the way up to 7 damage. Not a huge buff, but it is a welcome change. But not only that, but its energy is also going to be increased a little bit here. So going from 12 energy to 13, that's the same energy as Rollout, which is one of the best moves in the game right now. Rollout is a move that you see oftentimes on Pokemon like Dunsparce, Licky Licky, but Hex is on a lot of Pokemon that actually have that stab damage to it. Rollout normally is on non-stab Pokemon. Hex being stab means it's going to have quite a bit of damage, despite being a little bit less damage than what Rollout is currently. currently, although as we're going to talk about in a second, Rollout is getting its damage decreased just a little bit, so Hex and Rollout will actually be clones of each other. But Hex is in an interesting spot because we have Astonish already in the meta, we have Shadow Claw, so all of these good Ghost-type charge moves, or fast moves rather, that you're going to have to kind of compete for. Which move do you want to use? Hex is going to be a good all-around quick charging Ghost-type fast attack, but you're going to be fast move farm down with a lot of Ghost types by those Astonish users, by those Shadow Claw users, so I don't know if Hex is going to be a top-tier move or not, but there are a couple Pokemon that can take advantage of it that we'll go over in a second. But overall, I think Hex is going to be maybe the second, maybe the third best Ghost-type charge move, or I keep saying charge move, it's a fast move. It might be the second best, it might be the third best. I think Shadow Claw and Astonish are probably still in the top spots, but this is going to make a lot of Pokemon that don't have access to those moves just a little bit better. Next up, we have an Acrobatics buff, actually. Acrobatics being a very efficient charge move already. It's similar to Outrage with what it was before this energy decrease, and now it's going to be lowered likely to 55 energy, maybe 50. I think if it was 50 energy, though, that would be a little bit too much. Acrobatics is not the most wide distribution charge move in the world. Jumpluff is probably the most common Acrobatics user in the game. You also see Pokemon like Emolga do have access to it. I'm not sure quite who else has it. We can take a look at that in just a second, but Acrobatics overall still a very good nuke already, and just getting a nice buff here potentially could make it so some movesets are going to change in the future. Acrobatics is going to be a very powerful attack depending on what the meta is going to look like. And then Air Cutter, another flying type charge move, but honestly, I don't think this move is going to be good at all. It's going to go from 60 damage to 45, so they are decreasing the amount of damage it's going to do, and they are also decreasing its energy, so it's going to be reworked a little bit here, and there's a chance to increase the user's attack stage. I would assume by one stage. Yeah, it does say by one stage there, so I guess I should read a little bit better. I have no idea what that attack percentage chance is going to be to boost your attack stat. If it's like a 50-50 chance, maybe that's interesting depending on what Pokemon get this. I think off the top of my head, maybe like Gallback gets this attack, but overall it's a very low distribution move. I don't expect it to be a very strong attack in general, and because it's a 45 damage move and only has a chance to give you a stat increase, it's just a worse version of Poison Fang, I think. So I don't think this move is going to be very good, but we'll have to see if they end up, potentially giving it to better Pokemon in the future, or maybe there's just a Pokemon that I'm not even thinking about right now that could get this attack that I should look into. All right, next up, Rock Tomb is also going to be getting changed here. Rock Tomb, not exactly the best charge move right now in the meta because it's such an expensive attack. It doesn't do a lot of damage, but it is a guaranteed attack drop, which does make it a little bit unique. But we can see here, they're going to change it. It's going to go from 70 damage all the way up to 80, so a nice 10 damage increase, and its energy cost is also going to be decreased. We don't know by how much, but if it gets decreased to like 50 energy, this move could actually be pretty interesting. It's also going to keep its guaranteed attack drop, so it's going to be in the veins of maybe like an Icy Wind attack. If it is 50 energy, it's going to be a little bit more expensive, but even still, a lot of Pokemon do get access to Rock Tomb that would definitely love to see this buff. It's going to be interesting, though, to see that exact energy decrease. If it's going to go down by 5 or 10 energy, it's going to make or break this move, and potentially could make some Pokemon better or worse than they are right now. But not going to be the biggest change, but it is going to be a change that Pokemon in the future or in limited metas could take advantage of this move. Next up, we're going to see a rollout change. As I was talking about a little bit earlier, Hex and rollout are now going to be the same exact move, so 7 damage and 13 energy per rollout or per Hex. And rollout is going to be a bit of a detriment here to have that damage decrease because a lot of Pokemon that use it, as I was saying earlier, are using it as a non-stab fast attack. Pokemon like Dunsparce, Pokemon like Licky Licky, they are reliant on this fast move pressure, and having a bit less damage is going to make it so it's even less efficient. And I don't really know if it's going to make it so Dunsparce is out of the meta necessarily, but it's not going to help it out too much, and maybe it's going to make it so a lot of other Pokemon are going to be a bit more flexible. I think right now Dunsparce is a pretty annoying core breaker to try to deal with, so having this attack at a bit less damage might make it so Dunsparce and those rollout users just in general will be a little bit less used in the meta. Next up, we have a Nightshade nerf as well. Nightshade being one of the most efficient chargers in the game. At least it was. I guess it only makes sense. If you're going to nerf the normal types like Dunsparce, you got to nerf the ghost types as well. Corsola, Galarian Corsola that is the main user of Nightshade in general. Because of the fact that it's such an efficient charge move, I think it just makes sense here on such a bulky Pokemon to rein it in a little bit, make it so those neutral matchups are still going to be good. Because, I mean, it's still a good charge attack, right? 45 damage, or 45 energy, 70 damage is a very efficient charge move even still. It's just not going to be quite as strong in those neutral scenarios as it was in the past. I don't think it's going to make it so Corsola's not in the meta anymore, but it will make it just slightly worse in those scenarios where it's not doing super effective damage or resisting moves from your opponent. I think it's a good change, and I hope that Corsola is still going to be good because I just got a really good one a couple days ago, but it's going to be a Pokemon that's reined in just a little bit more into the meta. Next up, we have a Foul Play rework as well. This move is a move that a lot of Pokemon have access to that are currently in the meta. Malabar is probably the biggest one, but Pokemon like Mandibuzz also have access to it. Sableye could take huge advantage of this energy decrease. One of the biggest issues with Sableye has always been it's just been a little bit slow to reaching charge moves, so having either a 45 or a 40 rather or 35 energy move could help it out a ton. We have no idea exactly what the energy decrease is going to be. Currently, it is 45 energy. It says there's just an energy cost decrease. It could be down to 40 energy, which would make it 40-60, not the most efficient charge move, or 35-60, which would make it in the same realms as the old version of Body Slam before the insane Body Slam nerf that we saw a couple months back. So if it is going to be a 35 energy move, Sableye is going to be top tier, one of the best Pokemon in the game. If it's going to be 40 energy, it's going to be a very consistent move, and I think it's probably more likely that it is going to be that 40 energy variant, because if it's 35 energy, Sableye would be insane, Malamar would be insane. That pacing is just so quick, so I would assume right now it will be that 40 energy move, but if it is 35 energy, we'll be surprised, and it's going to make it so the meta is going to revolve a lot around those Dark-type Pokemon. Next up, a Discharge rework. Once again, a move getting both a power and energy decrease, 65 damage down to 55 damage, and an energy cost decrease. This one's pretty interesting to me, because Discharge already is a pretty bad move, in my opinion. It's just kind of underwhelming, right? I didn't think that they would nerf its attack this much, unless they're going to also make it so its energy is much, much cheaper. Right now, Discharge, I believe, is a 45 energy move. If it goes down to a 40 energy move, then having 40 energy and 55 power is honestly a pretty bad attack. It's what Fire Punch, Ice Punch, Thunder Punch used to be before they ended up increasing those damages. So I'm not quite sure if they're going to go that route or if they're going to make it a 35 energy attack. If it's 35 energy and 55 damage, that's like Aqua Tail. It's a pretty efficient move, and it would make Pokemon like Charjabug, Unova, Stunfisk, Emolga all very powerful. But it's really going to come down to if this move is going to be 35 energy or 40 energy to see just how powerful or how weak this move is going to be in the current meta. Very interesting, though, to see this rework. I am happy that they are touching this move and making it just a little bit different, because Discharge as a whole right now is pretty underwhelming attack. I'm hoping it's 35 energy. It would make a lot of good Pokemon even better, and in general, I would love to see more electric types in the meta. So hoping for that 35 energy. I guess we just have to wait and see, though, to see the exact energy amount later on. All right, moving on into the attack availability updates. These are moves that Pokemon didn't have in the past, but they can now learn in the new season. So a lot of interesting changes that can happen here. Let's take a look at them. First up, we have Piloswine and Mamoswine, both getting the charge attack Icicle Spear. This move is famously one of Walrein's best attacks that it can use. Walrein is going to be a bit of a less used Pokemon right now, but it did actually just win the European International Championship. So potentially this could make it so Piloswine and Mamoswine are going to be just a little bit better. I think Mamoswine is also a Mud Slap user, so maybe in Master League this could be a good change. Piloswine rocking Powder Snow as its fast attack, and also potentially being just a bit more quick pacing with these moves might make it better. I'm not sure if this is going to push Mamoswine or Piloswine into the forefronts of the meta, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see here. I think Icicle Spear is a fantastic attack, but because Piloswine and Mamoswine are weak to a lot of different typings, as being an ice and ground typing gives you very few resistances, I'm not quite sure if this is going to be the best meta addition out there. But very welcome change here. Icicle Spear, it does deserve more distribution. It's not the best attack in the game, but it is a very efficient one, and one that a lot of Pokemon could potentially learn. All right, next up, a Togetic and Togekiss change, both learning the charge move Psyshock. Not exactly the biggest change for Togekiss, but for Togetic, we have to keep in mind Psyshock is getting that energy decrease, so it's going to be a very efficient charge attack. In fact, I was looking at it earlier. If you are using Psyshock and Aerial Ace. Psyshock is actually more efficient in neutral scenarios than Aerial Ace, and they're both the same energy. So in general, you probably want to run Psyshock and Dazzling Gleam on Togetic. So having both Dazzling Gleam and Psyshock as buffed moves in this season could potentially make it so Togetic goes from kind of a niche core breaker into more of a forefront Pokemon in the meta. Togekiss, as I was saying, not exactly the biggest change for it, but it is going to get a cheaper charge move, right? So a 40 energy move on a Charm user is going to be a little bit quicker pacing than it is right now. I believe right now the cheapest move that Togekiss does have is Ancient Power, but Togekiss is really only useful in Master League, not the most impactful change, I don't think, but it's going to be interesting to see if they ever give Togekiss a better fast move than Charm. Maybe you can take advantage of this attack. All right, next up, we're going to see a couple more Psyshock users here. We're going to see Reuniclus and Bruxish both getting these charge attacks. I don't think it's going to matter too much for either one of these. Bruxish has seen a little bit of limited play in some custom metas in the past, but you already have access to Psychic Fangs. I don't think you're going to want to run the double Ghost, or double Psychic rather, charge moves. And in general, Reuniclus just doesn't have a good fast attack. I think it's on Hidden Power, actually, as its best fast attack in the game. So I don't think either one of these two will get much use out of this change right now. Maybe in the future they'll get a better update, but I don't think that this is going to change too much. Next up, we're going to see a couple Psywave additions in the game, and these are big. At least two of them are pretty big. The first one, Venomoth, is not going to be the best addition out there. Being a poison and bug typing Pokemon, it's going to be a little bit weak to a lot of different things. It's a pretty squishy Pokemon as well, but you have to keep in mind, you're a Psywave user with Poison Fang. That could give you a little bit of a niche in the meta. I don't think it's going to be a good Pokemon, but it could be a pretty interesting Pokemon debuffing and Psywaving through picks. We don't really see that too often right now, so interesting to see Venomoth with it, but Lapras and Grumpig are actually the two Pokemon that I want to take a look at a little bit more in depth later into this video. Lapras is a Pokemon that has always been kind of outshined by the other water and ice types, right? Walrein has had its time in the sunlight. Dugong as well is one of the best water and ice types in the game. Lapras, though, with Psywave, is going to have a lot of neutral fast move pressure into them. It's going to have super effective coverage against the fighting type Pokemon. It's going to pace moves pretty quickly, have a very efficient fast move, and overall give it a very unique space in the meta. I don't know how it's going to feel to play, on my own here. I haven't tried it out. I wish I could. It seems like a very fun Pokemon to use, but it feels like a very flexible Pokemon. It is going to be kind of walled by the other Psywave users because you're using non-stab Psywave, but having access to Surf, Ice Beam, Skull Bash as well, very efficient charge moves, and also it does have a charge move that's going to be added in just a little bit later into this video as well that we can take a look at. But a very interesting meta addition. I think Lapras could potentially be top meta. It can take out Azumarill. It actually has a lot of play. I was looking into it into Shadow Drapion as well. It can beat the Diggersbys. It can beat just a lot of Pokemon currently in the meta for Alligator as well. So Lapras could be a top meta pick. If you have one, make sure to save it. Make sure you're upgrading it, and I think it's going to be one of the best Pokemon in the new season. Next up, Grumpig as well, another Psywave user. At first, when I saw this on the update here, I was like, man, that's not going to help it out at all. Grumpig sucks. It's like in the bottom 900 of PvPoke right now. There is no way this Pokemon could ever be good, but Psywave is not the only change it's receiving. It's going to get a new charge move, as we'll look over in just a second, but Psywave on a stab psychic type Pokemon with it's honestly not that squishy as well. Grumpig is kind of bulky. This Pokemon is going to be a very interesting pick. We'll take a look at it once we see its next charge move addition as well, but I think Grumpig could have a little bit more play than I was going to give it credit for, and it might actually be kind of top meta depending on how common you see ghost type Pokemon in the new season. Next up, we're going to see a couple Pokemon get access to Swift. Furret, Linoone, and Drampa all getting access to this very cheap normal type charge move. It is going to help out Furret and Linoone quite a bit. I think Drampa is he's a cool looking guy. I don't think it's going to be that good, unfortunately. It's a pretty squishy Pokemon. Dragon Breath in general is not the best fast attack right now. And even though you have access to Swift, it is not going to help it out too much because you are weak to fighting type. You're not really doing a lot in the meta as a dragon type right now. So Drampa, probably not as useful, but Linoone having a very cheap charge attack here with Swift pairs very well with Shadow Claw. Furret already has Sucker Punch, so Sucker Punch and Swift, very good synergy as well. So very interesting new normal type Pokemon to use in the game. And they're also going to be getting access to some other moves here, as we'll check out in just a second. Grumpig, I was just talking about you. Dynamic Punch is going to be the other addition to its moveset. So it's going to have Shadow Ball and Dynamic Punch as the charge moves, and Psywave as its fast move. The reason this is so interesting is because Dynamic Punch did get that energy decrease. So it's a very cheap move, a very efficient move, and it has that lucrative ghost and fighting type coverage that you see ever so often on Annihilate. Annihilate makes this moveset and this typing look so fantastic. Grumpig, being a bit bulkier, being a Pokemon also with Psychic type fast move pressure, could put in a lot of work right now in the meta. Grumpig is a Pokemon I never thought would be good, but I was checking out the new rankings. It is in the top 10 of PvPoke right now. It was in the bottom 900. It's back to top 10 somehow. This is like the biggest blow up I've ever seen of any Pokemon in the entire game. So Grumpig, if you have one, make sure to start investing in it. It is going to be great. Next up here, Dusknoir also getting Dynamic Punch, right? We were just talking about this Ghost and Fighting type coverage. One of the best coverage options in the entire game. With that Dynamic Punch buff as well, you're going to have a lot of very good and efficient charge move pressure against the normal types that generally wall this Astonish user. Also, Dusknoir does have access to Hex, which is going to potentially make it another interesting option, right? Hex would make it so you pace to Shadow Punches very quickly, only 3 Hexes to a Shadow Punch, and Dynamic Punch would be 4-3 pacing, just like Drill Run is on a Pokemon like Dunsparce. So a very interesting decision to make. Do you want to run Hex as your fast move or Astonish? And potentially, I think Dusknoir could be a very strong pick in the meta too, just because of how good its coverage is, and because it's also a pretty bulky Pokemon itself. It's around 118 attack stats, so a little bit bulkier than Feraligatr, a little bit squishier than a Pokemon like Gastrodon, so kind of in that range. You can also run Shadow Dusknoir if you want a bit more offensive pressure. Very interesting pick here. Very excited to see how it's going to play out. Lapras, once again, we were talking about you a second ago with that Psywave addition. Not only that, but it's getting the Charge move Sparkling Aria. This move is a very good attack. It's basically just a better version of Surf. It's a very high damaging move, a pretty low energy water type attack as well, which is going to help out Lapras a ton in differentiating itself in the meta right now. So Lapras, it's going to have two very good additions to its moveset. I think it's going to be top meta right now. Probably one of the best Pokemon you're going to see, and a pick that you're going to have to try to work around if you want to beat it, because Rollout just got nerfed, right? Annihilate is going to be taking super effective faster pressure from your Psywaves, so you're going to have to get a little bit creative in countering Lapras right now and trying to build around it in this next meta, but I think it's a very healthy Pokemon. I am very excited to see the Lapras meta. It's been a long time coming here. It used to be good in Ultra League. I bet it's going to be good in Ultra League again, but in Open Great League right now, it's going to have its time to shine. Up next, a Sableye buff. Sableye already had that Foul Play rework, which is going to give it a lot better pacing in the meta, and it's also going to be getting access to the charge move Dazzling Gleam. Dazzling Gleam, keep in mind, it did get that rework. It depends on what the energy cost is going to be here. If it's going to be that 55 energy or 50 energy move, it could potentially be a very efficient attack for it. But Sableye kind of struggles right now, where it already has Power Gem. What moveset do you want to run? Do you want to run Gleam to potentially have better coverage against the Dark types, or Power Gem to have better coverage against the Ice types like Lapras that are going to be in this meta? And, it's going to be an interesting kind of give or take on what moveset you want to run. I think both are very viable. It depends on what's going to be really top meta in the future here to see what moveset you're going to want to run. It's come a long way from back in the day when Return was its best coverage option. It has a lot of moves right now that you could potentially run on it. So Sableye, very interesting pick. I'm excited to see a Sableye resurgence here, especially as a way to counter the Shadow Annihilates that we've seen a ton in the meta. So Sableye, keep an eye on that. Ribombee getting access to Charm. I don't know how I feel about that. I don't think it's going to really impact things too much here. Obviously, Charm is going to be a very high damaging fast move. It's a bug and fairy type Pokemon, which honestly not the best defensive typing out there, but it's one of the best fighting type counters in the game, I guess. I don't think Ribombee is going to be a good pick though. So maybe if you're a Spice user, you want to use a spicier Charm Pokemon, try this out. But I don't think it's going to be the best Pokemon to see. Then a couple of rollout users here. The best one probably being the first one that we see, right? Blastoise getting rollout is going to be a very bulky Pokemon getting access to a very quick charging fast move. Hydro Cannon plus rollout is a little bit awkward actually with the counts. It is 39 energy after 3 rollouts is 40 energy for a Hydro Cannon, so it takes 4 rollouts unfortunately for your first charge move, but then it's like 3 rollouts for the next 12 Hydro Cannons if you get to 12 Hydro Cannons, which you're probably not going to. But a very interesting Pokemon to be giving rollout to. I think Blastoise isn't going to be a top pick, but in a meta where Lapras is going to be around quite a bit, having super effective rollout against it could potentially be a good option. And just in general, rollout, even though it got nerfed, is still a very efficient attack. I think it could have a lot of play here, and you could also run moves like Skull Bash to increase your defense stat on Blastoise. Ice Beam is good coverage, and just in general, it could be a bit more useful than it used to be. And honestly, Blastoise has kind of always felt like the worst water type starter. Might have a little bit more play here in the Open Great League. Next up, Weezing doesn't have a bait move. It's not going to be good. Wailmer, yes, it could have a bit of play. It has Body Slam as a bait move, so a very spammy rollout user. Wailord as well. I don't think it's going to be that good, but, I know a lot of people like these in the meta, or just like them as Pokemon, so they might be a little bit more viable having rollout, but I wouldn't put any stake in it. I don't think they're going to be top tier additions, but a fun moveset addition nonetheless. Glalie also getting the fast attack rollout, a very interesting change. Not too many ice types have that rock type coverage, but I don't think it's going to help it out too much. It's still going to have a lot of work to do, not having a bait move. So Glalie, it's probably just a worse version of Frostlass. Still, I wouldn't put too much hope in this basket of being a good Pokemon. Rayleigh getting the Charge Attack Rock Tomb, which we don't know the exact rework of, but if it is going to be 50 energy, potentially could be a very good addition to its moveset. Bombirdier also with Rock Tomb, not going to be the most useful update because Bombirdier does kind of suck, but Rock Tomb is just a good coverage move, I guess, for a flying type Pokemon, so potentially kind of interesting here. Swampert getting Sludge, a good coverage move for a Pokemon only weak to grass type damage, right? So Sludge is super effective against those grass types. It also is good against the fairy types you're going to see a lot in the meta. So it could potentially help out Swampert, but you are still on that nerfed version of Mudshot. If it was 5-4 pacing to Sludge, I could see it being a little bit better, but Mudshot right now is a little bit underwhelming, which might hold Swampert back a little bit, but it definitely is a welcome addition, especially after the Sludge buff that we had this season. Sludge also being added into Swalot's moveset. Swalot, sometimes referred to as Italian Muck, is not exactly the best Pokemon out there currently, but giving it a bait move could help it out quite a bit. It has the same fast move as Swampert, it's using Mudshot, and it would likely use Ice Beam and Sludge as its coverage moves, so it's not the worst Pokemon out there. Might be a bit of a core breaker to the Shadow Drapion Azu core, but because of the fact that it's using a lot of non-stab damage, it might struggle a bit in some neutral matchups, but Swalot is actually a pretty bulky Pokemon, so an interesting moveset update. I'm sure it could have some play here. We'll have to see, though, if the Psywave users are a bit too much for it, because a lot of Psywave users are going to be top meta, a lot of Ghost types as well, which are going to make it so Swallow is a little bit harder to use. Up next is going to be a Dragalge change. Unfortunately, not giving it Sludge. They're giving it Sludge Bomb for some reason. I hope that's a typo, but it probably isn't. Sludge Bomb not going to help it out too much. It already has too many charge moves. Dragalge still going to suck. Next up, Poison Sting on Roserade. It's going to help it out a little bit to have a bit more fast move pacing. But I don't think Roserade really needs that. It already has a pretty good charge move pool, pretty good fast move pool, but it's a very squishy Pokemon. But it will have very spammy fire type coverage with that Weather Ball fire. 1, 2, 3, 4 Weather Ball could be kind of interesting. I wouldn't really expect it to make it top meta, but maybe in limited metas where there's like a lot of grass types, this could help it out just a little bit. For it getting Trailblaze, Linoon getting Trailblaze, we saw earlier that they both got Swift as well, so their charge move is likely going to be Trailblaze and Swift that you'd use, and then with Linoon, Shadow Claw, with Furret, Sucker Punch. So very interesting options here. Good counters to Pokemon like Shadow Feraligatr potentially. Good counters to the Ghost types as well. Furret and Linoon might actually be kind of good in this meta. They're going to be kind of bulky Pokemon as well, and pretty spammy with these moves. So excited to see if they actually are going to be top tier or if they're going to be kind of more fringe meta. But I could see them actually having quite a bit of play right now. Next, we have a Trailblaze on Florges, which I don't know how much help that's going to really have in the Open Great League and Master League Premier. Probably a very good trade-off to go for Trailblaze rather than Disarming Voice. But in Great League, it's still kind of just an underwhelming fairy. I don't think you really have anything going for you that other fairy-type Pokemon couldn't just do better, but a very welcome change. I think that it makes sense as well on Florges to have a Grass-type charge move that isn't Petal Blizzard, which is a very expensive charge move. But I don't think it's going to change too much in anything other than maybe Master League Premier, as I was saying. Then Sucker Punch being added onto 3 Pokemon's movesets here. Mightyena, Bellibolt, and Bombardier. Bombardier is getting access to Rock Tomb as well, so double Bombardier buff, but it's a very squishy Pokemon, and it doesn't really have any bait moves in the meta to use, so, I mean, despite the fact it has a lot of efficient moves, like Fly, like Sucker Punch, like Rock Tomb, it's going to be kind of slow to its fast and charge moves, and I would assume that Galarian Moltres is still just going to be the better option, but, maybe if you don't have the access to a Galarian Moltres, it is kind of hard to get. Bombardier could fill in that gap. Mightyena is kind of interesting. It has access to Sucker Punch and Poison Fang to lower your opponent's defense stats, but I think that Mightyena is a little bit too squishy, and it might need a bit more in the charge move coverage range to have more play. Bellibolt, non-stab Sucker Punch, probably not the most efficient thing to have, but it will help it out having a coverage move that's not just going to be mono-electric like it has right now. Potentially could be kind of interesting, but once again, Bellibolt, not the best Pokemon out there. It's weak to ground, which is a very common typing right now. And as you can see, ground types did not get nerfed in the slightest in this meta, so I think Bellibolt will still be a fringe pick at best. Now, while we don't know all the exact energy costs of the new moves and everything like that, we can still take a look at what they will potentially look like given on what the community thinks the energy costs will be at. Let's take a look real quick at the rankings and see just how much the meta has changed. So as we can see here, this is going to be a preview of the new season with some, just guesses on what these new movesets will look like. We can see that at the top, Mandibuzz, Clodsire are still somehow number 1 and 2. They didn't really get changed in this update, but they're still very, just good Pokemon in general. But then we start seeing some changes, right? Lapras at number 3 with Psywave, Sparkling Aria, and Ice Beam. Very efficient moveset, very good coverage, and a Pokemon that I think is going to core break a lot of current teams. Malamar with that Foul Play buff, and this is assuming Foul Play goes to 40 energy, is going to be the same pacing to Foul Play as it is to Superpower, going to make it much more spammy, much more of an offensive threat as well in the meta, a better counter to Ghost-type Pokemon, and in general, just a better neutralist, so I think Malamar is going to be a very strong pick. Sableye as well, Shadow Sableye is going to be number 5, which makes sense with that 40 energy Foul Play. Its pacing is going to be greatly improved. It's also running Dazzling Gleam here, which is, I don't know if that's going to be the move to run. I think it's going to be a toss-up between Dazzling Gleam and Power Gem, but potentially it is going to just be a much more flexible pick than it was currently in the meta, and that good pacing is going to help it keep up with things like Shadow Feraligatr. It's going to help it outpace a lot of Pokemon as well. I think that Shadow Sableye is a very fun pick, but I don't know if this is a sim hero or if it's going to be a Pokemon that's actually going to be fantastic in the new season. I think it is going to be a very solid pick as a way to counter these Psywave users, but there also probably will be a lot of Wigglytuffs and stuff, which will still shut it down. We have Corsola, which, despite the nerf, it is still at number 6 just because it's so bulky, and it was only a 10 damage decrease on Nightshade. It's still a very efficient charge move, so it makes sense it would still be pretty high up. Grumpig at number 7. As I was saying, I was never expecting this Pokemon to be good, but we can take a look at it. If you don't know what Grumpig is, it's like 115 attack, so think of like Gastrodon level bulk. That's kind of where Grumpig is, and it has access to a very good charge move pool, Shadow Ball and Psywave, very good pacing, very good pressure, and in general, I think a very unique Pokemon that kind of just came out of nowhere. Never would have thought Grumpig would be meta, but Pokemon Go finds a way for a lot of these crazy Pokemon to make them good. We have Dusclops as well, utilizing the Hex buff. It's a very bulky Pokemon. Let's see, what's Dusclops' attack stat? Kind of around where Corsola is here, 103 attack, and it has access to a lot of different coverage moves, right? Shadow Punch, Ice Punch, Fire Punch, Poltergeist if you want to use a raw nuke move, and just in general, a very bulky Pokemon. I think this could be a very interesting pick, but it will be a Pokemon that is going to be outshined by some other ghosts potentially, because we can see the Shadow Sableye will kind of distribute through your health. You have a lot of other ghost types with Astonish, so having Hex as your fast move might not be the best case scenario. It might be more of a sim hero here than anything, but it could also just be a very strong pick. Shadow Dusknoir as well at the top of the list here, right after Dusclops. Then we can see a couple more of the old meta Pokemon, Clodsire with Stone Edge, Diggersby for Alligator still up here quite a bit. Morpeko as well. No changes to Morpeko, still a very powerful sweeper for Alligator. And then take a look at this, guys. Claydol is at number 15. Never would have expected Claydol to be at the top. Never would have expected Grumpig to be at the top of the Open Great League meta. I'm surprised. Why would Claydol be this high up? Honestly, I don't know, because they only buffed one of its moves. They buffed Rock Tomb, right? I guess just the guaranteed debuff that you get with Rock Tomb could potentially help it out quite a bit. I'm surprised though that it goes all the way from I don't even know where it was before, but it goes up to number 15 on the meta. I don't think it's going to be that good, but it could be an interesting Mud Slapper as a way to core break some teams. It is a Mud Slapper that resists fighting type damage, so maybe it's good. Maybe I'm a hater, but I don't see it being that good. I guess we'll see. Corviknight as well. Corviknight, we all know that Pokemon's not that good, and they did not buff it this season. So even though it's at number 16, I don't expect it to be, used that much at all. Jellicent with that Hex buff, it is going to be a little bit better pacing than it used to be, a little bit more fast food pressure, and taking advantage of that surf damage increase as well might make Jellicent actually a pretty good contender as a ghost type Pokemon. But once again, using Hex as your fast move makes it so a lot of the other ghost types kind of just beat you, but you're also a ghost type that has play into Diggersby because of that surf being super effective against them. So Jellicent could be a Pokemon to watch out for. Togetic as well, having Psyshock and Dazzling Gleam getting these buffs, making it so much better and so much more consistent with its offensive pressure. It helped it out with a lot of neutral matchups, and I could see it actually being a pretty good pick. Gastron, Pangoro, nothing changed there. Weezing is going to be very interesting to see what moveset is going to come out on top. It has Sludge and Brutal Swing right now, but I know it has Overheat, it has Play Rough, it has just so many different moves you'd want to use. It even has Hyper Beam. I think Sludge is going to be a default moveset that you always want to have, and honestly, with all the ghost types in the meta, it does make sense to have Brutal Swing as well. But it will be a bit of a tricky thing once again to determine what the exact moves that you want to run on this Pokemon is going to be. But Shadow Galarian Weezing, that is, if you have one, very, very cool new pick in the meta. And then a lot of old stuff here. Regular Dusknoir as well is pretty high up here. Shadow Machoke, taking advantage of that Dynamic Punch buff. Lapras, the Shadow Lapras is actually much worse than the regular, it seems, in the simulations. I haven't really gone over them myself to see which is going to be better in practice, but we'll see, I guess, when it comes out. I think that the non-Shadow is going to be just a little bit more consistent in a lot of matchups, but Shadow Lapras could be a lot of fun. Steelix is number 28, love to see that. Cradily, actually, with the Rock Tomb buff at number 29. Carbink Furret is at number 31. That's a pretty big buff here because of that Trailblaze and Swift coverage. Unova Stunfisk potentially would be even better than this. PV Poke right now is assuming that Discharge is going to be a 40 energy move. If it's a 35 energy move, that's going to make it so Unova Stunfisk is even more spammy and even better than it is right now. Honestly, I'd say that it's been a nerf to Unova Stunfisk, giving it 10 less damage for 5 less energy. But if it's 10 less damage for 10 less energy, then Discharge would be just so much spammier, so much better as a move. So we'll have to see if it's actually going to be, the 40 energy or the 35 energy here. If it's straight Force to Discharge with the 35 energy move, I think that Unova Stunfisk and Emolga right under it could be very strong picks. And as I was talking about it, Emolga here with Discharge and Acrobatics, even assuming the worst case scenario here with both the Discharge and Acrobatics buffs at number 33. It's a very good core breaker. It has a lot of offensive pressure. Let's see, its stats are a little bit squishy, right? A bit squishier than things like Shadow for Alligator, kind of around where the Shadow Annihilate bulk is going to be, but a very strong Pokemon just as a core breaker in general. You don't see a lot of electric types, so I would love to see it if Emolga was actually a good pick. Shadow Ape is all the way at number 34. Guzzlord, Shadow Marowak, Fable, Shadow Golurk with that Dynamic Punch buff could actually be kind of cool. Another Pokemon with that Ghost and Fighting type offensive pressure. Shadow Grumpig at number 39. Shadow Dusclops at 41. Not a lot of new stuff here. Aqua Ejaculacepod, number 46. I don't know if it's actually going to see a lot of play with all the ghost resists we're going to see in the meta, but it could be a very interesting Pokemon just in general. Roll out Blastoise in the top 50. That's cool to see. And then it looks like we see a lot of less new Pokemon. Medicham, Psycho Cut Medicham here with Dynamic Punch in the top 55, I guess. That's pretty cool as well. And Dynamic Punch, as I was saying, a very efficient charge move. I don't think Medicham is going to be very good in this current meta, mainly because of how many Ghost and Fairy type Pokemon you're going to see, but it could be a Pokemon to keep your eyes out for. So, as you can see, just a bit of a sneak peek into what the new meta is going to look like. Honestly, a lot more changes than I would have thought with this seasonal update. A lot of the good Pokemon did not get nerfed. Azumarill didn't get nerfed. Shadow Drapion didn't get nerfed. But a lot of them don't seem like they're going to be as powerful as they were in the past, just because of the fact that a lot of these new additions to the meta are going to start kind of just checking them a little bit better. Lapras specifically, I think is going to be one of the best Pokemon to have added into this meta. It's going to shake things up quite a bit, being a huge core breaker and a Pokemon that, if you don't have a good answer for, is going to be a little bit tricky to deal with, but it is also going to be a pick that has a healthy amount of neutral play into the meta, and I think it's going to be a very fun new season. All right, well, thank you so much for watching today's video. I'm going to be doing a lot more videos like this on the new Pokemon in the future. If you want to see more deep dives into any of these Pokemon that got updated, please let me know in the comment section below. I love making these videos. I love going over and nerding out on stuff like this. So, if there's any Pokemon that you're interested in seeing a deep dive into, please let me know in the comments. But yeah, thank you again for watching. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.